Hello, dear students. Today we want to discuss beautiful research phrases. First part. Why have I felt the need to share with you beautiful research phrases? Basically, every community has its own language or its particular register. A register means language of a profession. You are a researcher and a researcher has particular linguistic phrases. If you do not use them, readers consider that you do not belong to this community. If you use such terms, which usually researchers use, you would be considered the part of that community. So I have compiled the list of those phrases which will enable you to become the part of that research community. I will share with you certain phrases. You can modify them and introducing your work. Usually in introduction section, you introduce your work. The study will begin by outlining. The study addresses a number of issues because every research tries to handle some problems. Chapter X and X concentrates on. X mean suppose you are talking about any chapter or any section, it concentrates on. The following section sets out. Sets out means starts. To examine the research problem in detail, to shed light on a number of problem areas in current theory. In those studies in which you want to discuss theoretical issues. The paper presented here is based in part on an earlier study. Secondly, when you define scope of your study, a scope is also discussed in introduction section. The focus of the study is. The central question to be examined in this paper is, the study is important for a number of reasons. When you are writing significance, you should use this phrase. Present understanding is limited. Now you are finding a gap. Many authors would agree that previous studies have shown or suggested that the problem has been much discussed in recent literature. This approach has a number of advantages. Firstly, now you mention different advantages. The present study was designed to test the hypothesis. A fuller discussion of dash will appear in a later publication. Arguing for or against, especially in argumentative research works, you give arguments, but research paper is full of arguments, especially in discussion section. You take some stance and you argue in favor of your point of view. This point is particularly relevant to. This becomes clear when one examines. This lends weight to the argument. This is a beautiful expression, lends weight. Support for this interpretation comes from, suppose you have an idea and your evidence is observation or your evidence is related with previous studies. To put it another way, this raises the question whether, while it may well be valid that this study argues the importance of, this begs the question why. A serious drawback of this approach is, now you are finding gap in any study. One of the prime failings of this theory or explanation is, again you are discussing shortcomings. Reviewing others' works. You will use it in literature review. X study is a textbook example of. X work has had a profound influence on. Suppose you are discussing Noam Chomsky's work. So his work has profound influence on syntax, or universal grammar because universal grammar was presented by him. This study contains a number of new and important insights. Now you are mentioning newness and your contribution. X makes a strong case for. X takes little or no account of. There is little evidence to suggest that. It is very much on an oversimplification too. This study offers only cursory examination of. X gives a detailed, if not always tenable, analysis of. The authors claim that is not well founded. Now you are finding the weaknesses. Well founded mean that claim is not having any solid foundation. X explanation is not implausible if not entirely satisfactory. Analysis and explanation. One tentative proposal might be that if for the sake of argument we assume, sometimes we assume something and then we break the foundation. One of the most obvious consequences of this would appear to be supported by there is some evidence to suggest that. Now you are presenting evidence. The importance of dash is demonstrated clearly. Although it may well be true that it is important not to overlook, it is important to distinguish carefully between. Suppose you are discussing difference between code mixing and code meshing. You will use this phrase. It is not necessarily the case that the extent to which this reflects is unclear. A more plausible explanation for or would be the reason for is unknown but has been suggested by dash as a possible factor. Summary and conclusion. When you write a conclusion, you use these phrases. Concluding this section, we can say that this conclusion can be used. These phrases can be used in the conclusion section of every chapter. Chapter X draws together the main findings of the paper. This phrase will be used in chapter 5, conclusion, where you are discussing your major findings. This study has gone some way towards understanding. A number of key issues have been addressed in this study. This is also your contribution. The results lend strong support to. This study has highlighted a number of problem areas in existing theory. This is also contribution. While the initial findings are promising, further research is necessary. While you are presenting recommendations for future research projects, you use this phrase. The results of this study suggest a number of new avenues for research. This is also a beautiful expression for while you are writing recommendations. This raises a number of questions for future research. Argue. When you argue along similar lines, dash argues that there seems to be no compelling reason to argue that. As a rebuttal to this point, rebuttal means response. It might be argued that there are one, two, or three main arguments that can be advanced to support. Especially suppose there is Pakistani literature, and one person has argument that what the West considers Pakistani literature, Pakistanis don't call them Pakistani literature because those people do not have Pakistani nationality. They are not writing in Pakistani languages. The underlying argument is in favor of or against is that. Dash argument is in favor or against runs as follows. There are claims. Every research must present some claims. Usually these claims are discussed in chapter 4 data analysis and in conclusion section. In this paper, I put forward the claim that dash develops the claim that every research must have some claims. They should not be so tall that you cannot justify. Those claims must be justifiable claims. There is ample or growing support for the claim that. Dash findings lend support to the claim that. Taking a middle ground position, Dash claims that. Middle ground position mean you are staying in the middle. Data. Obviously, in research, data is present. The data gathered in the pilot study suggests that. You can also say the data gathered in uh, data analysis section suggests that. The data appears to suggest that. The data yielded by this study provides strong or convincing evidence that. A closer look at the data indicates that. The data generated by Dash is reported in table 1. When you are mentioning table or figure, you can use this expression. The data generated by Dash is reported in figure 1 or in table 1. The aim of this section is to generalize beyond the data. In modern usage, data can also be treated as a mass uncountable noun like information. Before you submit your work, check whether the institution you are writing for on behalf of prefers data plus plural verb. Remember, there is a controversy that, in fact, uh, datum is singular. This is a Greek word, and data word is plural. So there should be data are, data have, data are, data were to consider it plural. But in some organizations, they use the word data is. So it has been communicated that you should think about your organization. But I will advise you to use data as plural. Data are, data have, data are, data were. Thank you so much. If you have any question, please feel free to ask.